Hello, everyone, and welcome to the High Five Preschool and Kids Weekly Training Podcast. We are so excited that you are joining us today. And joining me today, I have Rachel and Kayla. Rachel and Kayla, how are you all doing today?
Doing so good.
Doing great, Isaac.
Well, I'm so excited that you are joining us. And listeners, I'm excited that you are joining us because today we are hopping into a brand new truth. For preschool, it is God has a plan for me. And the theme is look and see. So we can look and see God has a plan for me. And with kids, it is all about let's go. I am designed for a purpose. And kids are really going to understand that they have a purpose that God has set for them. So before we jump into that, one of those things with being a kid, growing up, is there is so much potential in the life ahead of you. There are so many things that you can go do, so many things that you can go be. So my question for us here, and all my questions for you too, is what did you want to be when you grew up?
Ooh, this is such a fun question. Because who didn't have something they wanted to be when they grew up? And then hindsight is always 2020. And you look back and you're like, that was a fun dream. This is what my actual reality turned into, which I also love. Okay, so you may not be surprised by this at all, but for a very, very long time, I wanted to be an elementary teacher. And I just, shout out to all of you teachers out there. You have the best and one of the hardest jobs that I know of. And so I'm just so grateful for all of our teachers because they make such an impact on our lives. But yeah, I mean, my mom was a school teacher. She still is a school teacher, actually. And she, I would remember going in her classroom and playing teacher. I think it was just a way for me to express my bossiness because I just loved bossing around these invisible children all the time. But yeah, I always wanted to be a teacher. I always wanted to do something in the realm of teaching. And so it's been really sweet to see how God's used that and led me to Lifeway. And in a way, I still get to do some of that. And so that's really fun.
For sure. I mean, I feel like that's still in alignment with what you are doing now. I actually got a text message from my sister the other day because all of my families are teachers. And I was like, oh, I wish I had a summer. And my sister's like, that's what happens when you don't go into the family business of teaching. So yeah. I could definitely see you as a fantastic elementary school teacher, Kayla. All right, Rachel, what about you?
Oh, yeah. Okay, so Kayla, I have to tell you, that's leadership, not bossiness. But as a child of the 90s, I was inspired by my favorite movie, Free Willy, and I wanted to work with whales and dolphins when I was a kid, and that eventually morphed into wanting to be a vet. And actually, I entered college in the pre-vet program and did that for a couple of years before I changed my major. So that's what I wanted to do.
That's so cool. Now, Rachel, do you have any pets now that you just take care of and love, even though you didn't become a veterinarian?
Yeah. So I have 2 golden doodles, Trapper and Dumbledore, but we call him Dory.
Oh my goodness.
Dumbledore. Oh my gosh.
Love it.
So fun.
Yes. Well, it may not come as a surprise to you guys, but I wanted to be a lot of things when I grew up. And I was one of those kids that every week you would ask me and it was something different. But the two that probably stuck around the longest was I grew up in Florida on the Space Coast. So I really wanted to be an astronaut. I thought it would be so cool to be able to fly, launch into space, and then be able to do a bunch of cool science experiments while I was in space. That sounded like the dream, all the problem solving, all the technical stuff of putting things together, taking them apart and figuring out how they work. I thought that was going to be fantastic. Unfortunately, I am very colorblind, and a big part of being able to do that is being able to have your pilot's license and flying. So very quickly, that dream fell to the wayside. But yeah. So that was my dream as a child, is I wanted to be an astronaut.
Wow. That is so on brand for you. I feel like reach for the stars, not the stars. Let me go into the atmosphere. Let me get as high and as Yeah, Isaac, you have such a wide variety of skill sets. Listeners, if you don't know, like Isaac does a lot of work in writing, but he also does a lot in kids ministry and teaching and training, and he does design. And like, you just have such a wide range of skill set, which is so unique and helpful, especially for the work that you're doing. But yeah, I totally could see you be like, let me go to outer space. Absolutely.
Oh, I still want to go to outer space. That's not off the table, but being a full-time astronaut is. So first time they're like, hey, you can go to space, I'm like, let's go. Let's go. Well, as we talk to kids about how God has a plan for them, there are so many things that they do have in front of them, and they're trying to figure out, what is my purpose? Who have I been created to be? And we just kind of came off of a truth back in June of I am uniquely designed. So Kayla, I just kind of want you to start us off. What is the difference between the truth, I am designed for a purpose, and I am uniquely designed?
Yeah, really great question, because they both have the word design in them for kids. Now, preschool is probably a little easier to differentiate because it's God made me special and God has a plan for me. And so I think in the answer, I would really lean in on the way we've defined it in preschool is kind of the same way we define it in kids. So for truth, that the truth that we did in June, which was I am uniquely designed, that's really answering the question of who designed me? What is special about how God made me? And so this is something that is true for all people, that we are made in God's image. We are made for him, that we are made to give him glory. Like, all of what is true about me because of what's true about God, which is, as you all know, sprinkled all throughout Hi-Fi, right? Why am I uniquely designed? How did God make me special? I am designed for a purpose is the what. So I am uniquely designed is more of the who designed me and why, but I am designed for a purpose and God has a plan for me. Lean more into what am I here to do? And so you'll see that really reflected in the main ideas that we're talking about, which are I can follow God, I can speak up for Jesus, I can love others, I can grow in my faith. And so as we are looking at those main ideas, we're really leaning into what are the things that I can do because God has a plan for me.
I love that. And I love being able to break that down for kids, that God's plan for them really starts with following him. And that's how we're going to start this first session of I Can Follow God. And we are going to jump in. I know Crystal calls me out for this all the time, where I say it's one of my favorite Bible stories, but I loved this Bible story growing up. I think it was one of the first moments in my life where I really understood, hey, this is something that God did, not that man did, because Gideon is put in such a crazy situation in Judges 6-8. And that's the story we get to break down for kids and preschoolers this week, of how Gideon was put into this situation where he really had to face the impossible. And in the story this week, we're not going to just talk about his obedience, not just talk about his bravery, but we get to actually highlight how his actions impacted others. So how can this really speak to this next generation, to Gen Alpha, as they look to, hey, what is my purpose? Hey, what is the plan that God has for me?
Yeah, I think this is a really neat Bible story for that, because we get to start our Bible story this session learning that Gideon is not the strongest. He's not the oldest. He's not the biggest. Then God calls Gideon to do something that seems really confusing. Form this army, and then he has to send people home. So he's left with a small amount of men, which is not what you would think would be strong, or what the plan would be. But Gideon leans in to his identity, and he leans into God's plan, and he follows God and knows that God knows best. And God has a plan for the situation. And even though it looked upside down, not what you would expect to do or to see, um, God worked through it. And I think that's really powerful for kids who are in this Gen Alpha generation, because um, they think a lot about their identity. They think a lot about fitting in and what looks like the right thing to do or say or be to belong. But instead, they can look at Gideon's life and see that they can lean into their identity. They can lean into how God created them, because he has a plan and a purpose for them, even if it doesn't make sense to what everyone else is saying or doing.
For sure. And I think with this generation, I mean, I know even for us growing up, we wanted to make this giant, big difference on the world. We wanted to leave our mark, leave our stamp. And when we find Gideon, he isn't trying to leave his mark, leave his stamp. He is trying to hide. He is trying to be sneaky and just get a little food for his family. But it is through the courage he finds in trusting God. It is through the bravery and obedience that he finds in trusting God. It is through following God step by step by step that he leaves a mark. He's able to free his people. He's able to defeat this massive giant army with just some torches and some horns. And I think that is my favorite part of the story. I love when God shows his complete power in the most outrageous ways. And this really does highlight it, that I mean, I don't know. I like to put myself sometimes into the shoes of those people from the Bible. Like, what would I be thinking if Gideon handed me a torch and a horn and be like, yeah, this is what you're going into battle with? And I'd be like, oh, are you sure? But the amount of trust that they had to have in God to follow him and then to see what happened from that, I think that is such a cool thing that we could just show kids and preschoolers. So, as we talk about following God, that is something that is a faith decision. It is part of becoming a Christian, telling God you are sorry for your sins, asking for his forgiveness, and then making the decision to repent and follow him. But how can we teach these concepts to kids who haven't yet made that faith decision?
I think that's a really good question. And I think it's great to ask in the kids space, but really in preschool, we ask this question every week because we're not assuming that preschoolers have trusted in Jesus yet. And so kind of in the same vein, as we're talking about what's the difference between I am uniquely designed and I am designed for a purpose, that I am designed for the purpose is to do what, right? What am I designed to do? But at the same time, we also want to answer the question of how do I do this? Well, I do this. And the answer is the same each time. I do this through Jesus. I do this through a relationship with God, or for preschool, through a friendship with God is how we talk about that in Hi-Fi. And so I can follow God. I love that we're starting with this one on week 1, even though we don't assume that kids are going to, be in regular attendance. And so there might be kids that miss this one that jump into week 2. But this is a really fun one to start with, because this is true of every kid. If you've made a decision to follow Jesus yet or not, that we can follow God. I can speak up for Jesus. I can love others. I can grow in my faith. The reality is that we can't do any of these things apart from God. And so as we are teaching these, we are also embedding the understanding as we teach kids and preschoolers of the how. How do I do this? How do I love others? How do I live out my faith? The only reason we can do this is through Jesus. We can't do this on our own. And I think that's a really important distinction. Every session of this truth that we talk about is that these are not things that we can do on our own. These are only things that we can do through the power and the work of Jesus.
That's so true, Kayla. I am very excited for this truth, especially as we unpack this theme verse of let your light shine before others so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father in heaven. This verse from Matthew really sums up the idea of let's go for kids and look and see for preschoolers, that we want our light to shine before others. We want the things that we do to shine before others, not to give us glory, but so that God can have all the glories, because our life was designed to bring glory to him. And that is so exciting that we get to teach that to kids and preschoolers, not only this week, but all of this month as we go through the month of August. So thank you all so much for joining us today for the Hi-Fi Training Podcast. Can you believe, guys, this is the 55th episode of the podcast. We've been doing this for 55 episodes now, and we are so excited that you are joining us along this journey. If you have not jumped into the Facebook group, please join us there. That's where we have some discussion. That's where we give a lot of our updates. There are always things new and exciting with Hi-Fi, and you don't want to miss any of those there. So until next week, we will talk to you later.